afternoon. That's better. This is a story of reconciliation. It's one story of reconciliation among perhaps thousands of stories of reconciliation, many of which have yet to happen. This is one story that happens to be our story, our personal story that we have to tell.
In a number of ways, it's quite unique to us. It's a story of a local church in a downtown corner, but in other ways, we'd like to think in larger ways, it can be the story of all of us who know any kind of division or separation and even isolation.
My name is Chris DeVos, and I'm an associate pastor at Pillar Church, which is about a block and a half away from here, a church that's been around a long time. And I grew up and was raised and trained for ministry in the Christian Reformed Church in North America.
And my name is John Brown. I'm the lead pastor of Pillar, and I was raised in and trained for ministry by the Reformed Church in America.
The great, big, huge, grand, sweeping story of reconciliation that beats within every one of our hearts. You know this story as the dreams we have for all wars coming to an end, violence ceasing, for abuse, oppression, any kind of discrimination not being around anymore. That grand, big, huge, sweeping picture of reconciliation that beats in our hearts actually only gains traction when ordinary, everyday folks begin to pay attention to the division and separation right in front of them, to really start living in the stories of reconciliation that are right next door on their front doorsteps. In our case, that happens to be the story of one small faction within the greater picture of the church called the Christian Reformed Church.
And the Reformed Church.
Think Hatfields and McCoys, Michigan and Ohio State, New Holland and Budweiser, Republican and Democrat. Whatever version of that story you may know or have heard about, this happens to be our story, the one that we have to tell.
In 1847, almost 168 years ago to the day, Albertus Christian Van Raalte led a band of about 50 Dutch immigrants to plant a community on the south shores of the Black Lake on the west side of the state of Michigan, having been invited by the state to plant the community. Among the first things they did was to plant a church that was connected to the community that was connected to the church in an absolutely stunning act of creativity, only the way the Dutch can. They named that first church Log Church.
It wasn't long before more immigrants joined and settled around the community, and there was a desire in the leadership of the community to connect with a bigger church in America. Overtures were made to the Reformed Church in America that had been around for a couple of hundred years, and eventually in 1850, that group of people in that log church joined the Reformed Church in North America. That was called the Union of 1850. But it wasn't long, actually only 7 years, before some of those folks who came and settled in the community weren't happy with that relationship with the bigger, more American church. And they decided, 3 of those congregations, to form another denomination called the Christian Reformed Church in North America. And so that began in 1857.
Van Raalte, though, and the congregation called the Log Church remained loyal to the Reformed Church. The catalyst for division in 1857 was fairly low within the Log Church congregation, so they remained connected. And that church began to thrive. They built a new building, a prominent building at the time with 6 white pillars. After Van Raalte died in 1876, just 6 years later, though, the tensions began to rise in the church with the pillars. Tensions around closed or open communion.
Open meaning you can participate fully in our worship service as long as you belong to any church. Even the sacraments you can participate in. Closed being you can only participate fully in the life worship of our church, including the sacraments, if you're a member of my church.
Tensions also existed around language, as is often the case with immigrant communities. Must we worship in our native language, or would it be okay, maybe, possibly, to preach and to pray and to sing in English too?
And then there was the issue of schools that became contentious. Was it okay to send children to the state-sponsored and funded schools, or was it necessary to send the children to private schools where the basics of the Christian faith were taught?
They argued over music too, if you can believe that, in the Christian church in North America. Should we only sing scripture songs, or would it be okay to kind of push the edges and sing some of those crazy hymns too? And what really actually fueled the flame of animosity was what's called the Masonic Lodge controversy.
Is it okay to be a member of this new growing fraternity with its secret oaths and secret ceremonies called the Masonic Lodge? Or, if you were a member of the church, you couldn't be a member of the Masonic Lodge.
So on a sad night in 1882, tempers flared, tensions were high, and the rope that held that congregation with the pillars together grew taut, so tight that it snapped. It broke, and two groups of people said,
"Can't be one in Christ with you."
The scene was reported in the Holland City News. This is an excerpt from the March 1882 edition. It was described as a riotous disturbance. Just exactly how you want your church meetings to be described. In fact, it was reported in the New York Times and in the Chicago Sun-Times. A vote was held that night in 1882, the majority voting to leave their denominational affiliation with the Reformed Church. The minority, not sure exactly what they should do, came back several days later to make some decisions about their own life. And they found the leaders of the majority holding axe handles like these to make sure they couldn't get inside. And the doors had been locked shut with a chain.
And that small band of people was sent packing down the road. But not to be outdone, that minority group that had been sent down the road decided to sue the church with the pillars. And the case actually went to the Michigan Supreme Court, all the way up to the Supreme Court of Michigan, where the state finally said,
"Hey, wait a minute. Aren't you Christians, the people of reconciliation? You figure it out." And the court actually never weighed in with a decision.
2 years after that moment, the Church with the Pillars, what we call Pillar Church today, formally joined the Christian Reformed Church, having left the Reformed Church, that bigger body in America, to join the smaller church, setting itself off now against its brothers and sisters in the Reformed Church, saying, "We're not going to be you, we're going to be us."
To our way of seeing things, the big, sweeping reconciliation that we want to see in the world, that we all long to see, where wars stop and division ends and discrimination and oppression and abuse just go away, requires basic, everyday, ordinary people taking reconciliation seriously where it's right in front of them, where it's closest to them, not as opposed to participating in the big reconciliation of the world, but actually as a way towards it.
We believe people don't have to stay separated. Things don't have to stay broken. And actually, deep within the heart of the Christian tradition, whether you embrace it or not, is a story about things being created at the beginning in harmony, in shalom, all parts working together purposefully as one. Perfect collaboration between creator and creation, created things, and between human beings. People got along.
Christians also think, though, that something bad happened. Something really sad happened. And though it may be true that God's heart beats to the rhythm of communion, and it might possibly be the case that God created us for collaboration, there's this spiral effect that exists among us from a long, long time ago that actually pulls us away from one another and pushes us against each other.
And we see that pushing and hear about it in the news feeds that come into our computers telling us of another suicide bomber halfway across the world, or another war breaking out, or more subtly in the relationships that break down around us, or even in the cleverest presentations we just watched, where the bad presentation is associated with the color black and the good with the color white.
We're wondering, though, what would happen if people took seriously reconciliation when it's up close and personal, when it's right in front of them?
We like the way it's put in a book called Reconciling All Things, where the authors talk about that spiraling out of control, that momentum of division and separation. And they say all the speed of that hits a wall when reconciliation is measured by what is closest to us. When the task is seen as reconciling in our homes, in our families, in our congregations. For somehow in our world, the grand visions of overcoming global violence have gotten nowhere, and we can't even fix our own marriages in our churches, or bring healing to alienated relationships, or even overcome our own anger about those who have wounded us.
So we want ours to be a story of taking reconciliation seriously where it's closest to us, the wounds that are more personal, not as opposed to participating in the big picture of reconciliation, but actually as a way towards it. So this is our story.
So about 7 years ago, as a group of leaders at Pillar Church down in the heart of downtown Holland thought about their future, they didn't think that the future was too good. It looked grim, actually. If you looked at the statistics, membership had been declining for 50 years, aging to the point where the majority of those in the congregation were over 65. There were hardly any children and no young people. But as the conversations and dialogue progressed, it became clear that there were moments in our history we needed to address. We began to remember that earlier part of the history when the church had been a welcoming community and settling place for this area, where people had worked in harmony. And now we began to imagine maybe a new day, instead of closing our doors and becoming a museum for the city's history, to live instead of over against those we had considered enemies, to begin to partner with them and live now in a vision of being together under one roof. Those who, in the greater scheme of things, were really small enemies now could be powerful partners together, to work together in collaboration as Reformed and Christian Reformed. And so on August 26, 2012, we reestablished ourselves as a dual affiliation church of the Christian Reformed and Reformed Church in America, to live out, not knowing where it would go, that new existence.
It was a Sunday morning in August 2012 when we stood together and we said, we're sorry. We're sorry for dividing 130 years ago, and we're sorry for staying divided for 130 years. On that same day, we built a baptismal font, a symbol among the Christian tradition for new life and hope, made out of axe handles and chains. And we like to now borrow one of the voices of our traditions past. Your swords will become plowshares, your spears pruning hooks, and then we add your axe handles will become baptismal fonts.
So this is our story. One story in perhaps thousands and thousands more reconciliation stories waiting to happen. This is the story we have to tell.
It's unique to us in some ways, according to the details of our history, but in larger ways and better ways, it can be any of our stories, any of us who've known division or separation or isolation, any of us who are willing to take our axe handles, whatever symbolizes those separations for you, that can become something new, something beautiful, something that gives life. Thank you very much.